Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to talk about a topic that we had mentioned in our previous podcast on the hanging of John Andre, and that is Peggy Shippen. And when we think about Benedict Arnold and his betrayal of the patriot cause at West Point, and we think about the hanging of John Andre, there's one person we need to talk about, and that is Peggy Shippen. And she is the wife of Benedict Arnold. And Chris, I think it's safe to say she played an important role in what he did and what ultimately happened to John Andre and Benedict Arnold.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's the linchpin. She is the bridge that connects Andre and Arnold together. And, you know, it's interesting when we start looking at all of these role players, and we're doing this kind of just having passed through, International Women's Day, and we start thinking about this as Women's Month when we look at the role that women have played in history and in life. And, in this situation, she played a huge role. I mean, Ray, I don't think that the whole Arnold saga, Andre, I don't think that happens without Peggy Shippen. And the sad thing is she played such a large role in this, and yet history tends to ignore her. And I just don't think you can tell the story without looking at how she has a monumental role in this. But the other thing is, was she a spy also? How much play did she have in it? Was she kind of just an inadvertent help without really knowing, or was she really involved in what was going on? And I think as we go through the story of Shippen and how this happens, I think the readers will be able, or listeners will be able to come up with a really good answer to that question.
Yeah. And, not just a spy, but apparently, if we believe, a very highly paid spy. But yeah, without her, Andre doesn't meet Arnold. Andre doesn't get hung, and events go in a very different direction. So let's just, and one more thing before we get into the meat of it. I think along the way, correct me if you don't agree, I think along the way we may see some reasons why Peggy isn't as well known as maybe Benedict Arnold, or even to some degree, Andrew. Okay. So Peggy Shippen is born in 1760, and she's there in Philadelphia. And Chris, Philadelphia was a very important city, during the American Revolution. At one point, the British take the city of Philadelphia. They occupy the city, and then, of course, they end up leaving the city. But she is there in Philadelphia. She's 16 years old during the American Revolution. She comes from a family, a pretty well-to-do family. Her father's Edward Shippen IV. Her mother is Margaret Francis, and they're a well-to-do family with, I guess, Chris, what we could say would be loyalist leanings. That is, leanings toward loyalty to the crown. Though during the Revolution, the family itself, maybe not Peggy, but the family itself really tries to play both sides. And that wasn't, when you look at the Revolution, we often, and I'm as guilty of this as the next person, when you teach the American Revolution, we talk about the loyalists and the patriots, and that's certainly true. But there were a lot of Americans who maybe they favored one side or the other, but depending on which way the wind was blowing, depended on who they were really championing at the moment.
Well, I think you had to if you wanted to be able to survive, because as you just mentioned, one moment you have the British who have captured the city, and then the next moment, it's the colonists that have retaken the city. And, if you're in that situation where Peggy was in, which is her family is very wealthy. I mean, they made a lot of money. through the British. They made a lot of money through the colonists. So, you have to play both sides of this, and add to the fact that her dad was a prominent judge. He was a member of the council. And this is all taking place in Philadelphia, which, sure, is the city of brotherly love. And yes, but also it's the hotbed of this idea that is going on as far as where things are happening, right? You've got the idea of the colonists who are, trying to decide whether or not we're going to stay or we're going to fight. You've got, the loyalists who are trying to, keep the peace and stay loyal to the king. And if you do have a lot of money, you don't want to mess around with the wrong people and actually lose favor. Because if you lose favor, you're going to lose all that glory. You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your position. You're going to lose your money. And, Peggy was living it up. She's the youngest of the daughters. But I think it's easy to see she's one of the favorite. I mean, she was spoiled by mom and dad, and they educated her, highly educated. She was very good when it came to the arts. And they say not only, Ray, she's in, and it's really hard to say this, I guess, when you talk about colonial women, but according to people in that day, she was extremely beautiful. I don't think that the portraits really demonstrate that very well, but she was very beautiful. And to go along with her beauty, she is an excellent dancer, and she is very favored in the music. She can sing and all. And so she's going to all these parties where she's meeting all of these people, people who are high up because it's wealthy parties, but what makes her, I guess, so unique is not only could she dance, but she could also talk politics. And that was rare to find back in the day, was a woman who was gifted in the arts, but also could hang with you when it talks about, politics and what's going on in the news. So, she is ripe, if you will, for kind of coming into contact with somebody such as an Andre or as a Benedict Arnold, because not only does she have the looks and the moves, but she's also got, the mind as well.
Yeah, and it's in Philadelphia in 1777 where she meets John Andre. And, the two spark up some sort of relationship. And I haven't been able to really, if you read, obviously I haven't had time to go back and dig through the primary sources and the letters and stuff for this episode. But if you read different historians, you don't get a clear take on whether there was anything more than friendship and politics between John Andre and Peggy Shippen, but they do strike up this relationship while the British are there in the city of Philadelphia.
So I think this is the perfect example of two individuals who are flirting to get something that they both need. It's not romantic. It's just using what you have. Andre, very dashing, very smart. Peggy, beautiful, also very gifted. I honestly think Peggy needed something from Andre. Andre found he could have something from Peggy, take away a relationship, but just in what's going to best interest me in my situation. I think that's what we see here. And, that she could go toe to toe with a major in the British Army, to where I'm not going to say she dupes him, because I don't think that's the proper thing, but where she convinces him to pretty much buy into everything that she's saying. Pretty important. Now, Andre is able to kind of get her to go more to a loyalist side also. So, there's a lot of things going on with this.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, and you sort of hit at it. Do you think she was using Andre, or was Andre using her?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely both. I think, listen, I think Dad's going in through some financial difficulties because he's having to maneuver loyalists and patriots. And, she is probably, and I think it was I'm trying to remember. I think we've talked about this in previous episodes. It was that show Turn that was on TV that kind of talks about the Culper spy ring that Washington had. But there's a scene in this where Andre meets Peggy, and she needed him for a lot of reasons because the British occupied the city. But I think he recognized, he's a spy master, and he said, if I can get her on my side, I'll be able to get updates about life in Philadelphia, which when it's taken by the Continental Army, he's then able to use that in a way that will benefit him. But Ray, I'll go a step further. I think Andre was so, what's the word? He thought that he was manipulating Peggy, and that she was just young, amateur,
small town bumpkin.
Yeah, and that he was playing her, that he really thought that he was playing her, but I don't think he really recognized how much she was playing him.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you bring in Benedict Arnold, who she also meets in Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken. After the British leave, I believe Arnold is put in charge of the city, isn't he?
Yeah, and Arnold's put in charge of the city, and there's no mistaking here. That girl uses him. I mean, now you want to talk about this, the coin is flipped, because Arnold is the bumpkin when he comes to Philadelphia. He has no reason being in Philadelphia. I mean, yes, he is a decorated war hero, but basically this is kind of we're sending you to Philadelphia to get out of our hair, and he goes to Philadelphia, and I mean, Peggy is able just to turn on her charm, and there's no mistaking, at least in my opinion, that she uses Arnold. I mean, he's twice her age, and
he's sort of ripe for the picking at this point, because he's bitter,
right?
You know, he's suffered injury, a leg injury, significant leg injury. He's seen other people promoted over him in the Continental Army. He's upset. He's not happy. So he's put there in Philadelphia, and so you get someone like Peggy who can, you know, obviously there was something there romantically, but also, you know, she's seeing someone who maybe she can manipulate to her side.
And I mean, we're going way out on a stretch. I mean, we're doing a lot of just, you know,
whatever.
But in some, this is just a big stretch, but I'm kind of thinking there's a possibility that Peggy really wanted Andre. And in order to get to Andre, she had to use Arnold. She's got something. She's got, you know, I mean, she's got the leader of the city now after Andre's been pulled out, the British are out. And so she, I mean, is able to kind of make some moves in her hopes that maybe Andre would, you know, take her, or maybe even Great Britain would take her too, you know, that she's looking at herself getting a role, getting a title, getting something for what she's going on. You mentioned something about a romantic relationship with her and Arnold. And I mean, yeah, maybe, but I just see this as more business, you know. I mean, she goes through the motions, and also saying, look, if I'm, quote, married to a general's wife, who's going to look at my correspondence?
Yeah. And so she and Arnold do get married. And by the way, Arnold, by this point, he's already got 3 kids. So he got a previous marriage, at least one under his belt. They get married in April of 1779. It's a controversial marriage for obvious reasons. He's almost 40. She's less than 20. Right?
Right.
So they get married, and it's within a month of that marriage that things start moving in the direction toward his treason. And of course, just to remind our listeners from our previous episode of what happens, you know, he's put in charge of West Point, this key military installation for the Continentals, and he's feeding information to the British. And then he has this meeting with John Andre. Andre gets discovered with incriminating information, and Andre is executed by George Washington. But the question is, what role did Peggy play in all of this? We think about John Andre, we think about Benedict Arnold, but what role did Peggy play in this?
Well, and one of the things that we know that she played in this is that she was the go-between between Arnold and Andre. And, she already had a correspondence with Andre. So she was already talking to him long before Arnold comes into the fold. And so, Andre's asking questions. So tell me about Philadelphia. What's going on down there in Philly? How's things going? And she's like, well, things are, she's sharing all of this information. And the next thing you find out is that, oh my goodness, wait a second. I'm getting married to this new guy who just happens to be the new general in New York City. And he's really upset with George Washington. He doesn't like the Continental Army. Hey, and she begins the correspondence because there's no way that Arnold and Andre can talk together.
No, she was the sort of tie between the two men.
Absolutely. And she's this go-between, and she's actually the go-between in the negotiations with the British because, she's writing these letters and she's putting in, the symbols and the things about, Arnold and what Arnold wants. He wants to leave the army, he wants to leave the colonists, wants to join the British. And, and she does this for a year. And I think it's really fascinating, the amount of work that she goes into making this happen. Everybody talks about Arnold, right? Arnold was a traitor, Arnold treason, Arnold this. I think Peggy does all the legwork.
Oh yeah, she's definitely behind the scenes pulling the strings, as it were.
And the dummy gets caught, and
the dummy there being John Andre, right?
Right. Because she's like, gosh, here I am letting these men try to handle this. And look at what they've done, because she carries on this correspondence. She gets the negotiations. She does all of this on her own. And it's not till Andre and Arnold meet up in that secret meeting that the dummy is caught with the maps of the fort.
Yeah, and as we said in the previous episode, Andre's mistake was he didn't have his uniform on. He was in civilian clothes, and he comes across some people he assumes are friendly to his cause, and he starts running his mouth. That's how he's discovered. He's eventually hung. The game is up, so to speak. George Washington and others now know that Benedict Arnold is a Judas Iscariot. He's the snake in their garden, so to speak. So, now that Andre has messed up, he's been caught, he's been killed. Benedict, of course, he's on the run now. What happens to Peggy? Where does this put Peggy? She now, in a sense, enters center stage as George Washington, among others, go to Benedict Arnold's headquarters, and she is there. What's going to happen to her?
Well, I think that's this is what's sad, but is that Peggy and Arnold are actually going to, host George Washington and the gang. They're coming down, and they're going to all have breakfast, and everybody's going to hang out. But then, like 2 days before they're due to arrive, that's when Peggy and Benedict find out, oh no, Andre is caught. That means they know about me. And what happens? Benedict runs for his life.
Yeah.
And leaves her. And so when Washington shows up, this is where I think you see the brains of the operation, because there's this fabulous primary source that talks about that encounter of Washington and Peggy. And Peggy is like a movie star, Broadway actress. I mean, she puts on the performance of her life. Oh my gosh, not my husband. There's no way my husband could be I don't know. I mean, she just on and on and on.
She's carrying on, talking about somebody putting an iron on her head or something to that effect. I mean, she is playing the role of a grieving woman who's just completely lost it all.
Because in her mind, to Washington, I did not know. How could he do this? My husband, we have a child. It was a baby, I think. I don't even think the child was like a year old.
No, and it's funny that Washington goes up to the room where she is, and they say, General Washington's here. And she says, she looks at him, she goes, no, you're not. She denies that it's him. And eventually he sort of says, yeah, and of course, very much paraphrasing here, but he sort of says, yeah, I am. And then she basically acts like he's there to kill her child. I mean, the whole thing, like you said, this is it Oscar or Emmy? I don't know. This is award-winning performance. And I mentioned earlier, Chris, why maybe she, Andre gets killed. Benedict's known as the great betrayer, but here she is sort of the middle of the whole thing. Why is history sort of overlooked her? And I think this is why, because Washington and the men around him believe her story. They believe, at least at the moment, that she is innocent, that she didn't know what was going on. And here's this poor woman, with her child, and she's just in such bad shape. So they let her go. She goes home to Philadelphia. They just let her go home, and Washington focuses on executing Andre and doing his best to get his hands on Benedict Arnold.
Yeah, and some people will say that, well, she was doing it to give her husband time to run away and to escape and all. But I go back and I look at the history of how Peggy has shaped this whole thing. And all three of these people are out for themselves. I mean, there's no, for the good of the country is definitely not happening. For the good of the family is not happening. I mean, this is Andre to Peggy, Peggy to Arnold, Arnold to Peggy. I mean, all of them are out for their own thing. And so I think she's really trying to cover for herself, because she also has a baby. And let's just be honest. What happens if Arnold and Peggy are both found to be guilty of treason? I mean, both of them are going to be killed.
That's a question I was asking myself in preparing for this episode. And it is, what if Washington had not been blinded by her performance? What if he had learned while he had her there that she was, to some degree, maybe not the mastermind, but certainly central to the plot? Would he have had her hung or shot, or what would he have done with her? I mean, that wasn't in the late 18th century. That wasn't an easy question for him to answer.
No, and just as we talked about in the last episode about his dealings with Benedict, I mean, he didn't want to, but he had to. And I think in this situation, I think it goes back to, there's that other part of it where, Washington only finds out about all of this through his own network of spies, that Culper's spy ring. And so I don't think, and by the way, I think it is interesting, and I'd have to go back to double check my notes, but I believe that the spy who finds out, who pretty much blows up this whole thing that's in Washington's spy ring, I believe that she was a woman also. And so I just think that's fascinating that the one who finds out about the Arnold affair was actually a woman spy working for Washington. But I don't think he would have had a choice, right? Because Washington is trying to keep together a nation. He's trying to keep together an army. He's trying to keep together all these people. If you do for Arnold, but don't do for Peggy, I mean, sure, maybe you don't hang her, but you can't let her live out the rest of her life.
She'd have to go to jail at the very minimum. I mean, Andrew, like you said, not Andrew, Andre, like you said, Washington struggled with the idea of hanging him,
right?
But he still had to. I don't think he'd have struggled hanging Arnold. I think
No.
if it came to Benedict Arnold, Washington might have done it himself.
Yeah.
But I think with her, maybe jail would have been it, but that doesn't happen. She's allowed to go home. She ends up meeting up with Benedict Arnold in New York City. And after Yorktown, they're gone. They get in a boat and they leave and they go back to London. And Chris, it's very interesting to me. She is treated very well. She gets a pension from Queen Charlotte, an annual pension. She is given a gift from King George III. I think it's 350 pounds, something like that. I mean, she is treated very well when she gets back, when she goes to England, because of course she's born and raised in Philadelphia, so it's not like she's going home. But she she's treated very well then. But when she comes back to her hometown, to Philadelphia, yeah, not so much.
Yeah, they actually called her traitor and,
Yeah,
you know,
there were
didn't want,
protests.
I mean, all kinds of nasty things. But there, it, you know, there's this is the beauty of history, is that this is one of those questions that you can't fully answer. You can argue the side that she was just an unwilling conspirator in it, or that she was the main conspirator in it. And I do think it's interesting that their history does reflect kind of both sides to that. There's even the story of, after everybody died, after Arnold died and Andre died and everybody else, that she finally kind of came clean, if you will. She expressed her feelings, and she said, I couldn't stand the American cause. I didn't like the American cause. Look at what it did to my family. Look at what it did to me. I mean, and so I'm the one who was responsible. And yay me, I was able to get a general in the Continental Army to give over maps and information to one of the best, the secrets in all of America at the time. So yay for me, right? And she actually said that, she said, I did it. I was responsible. Now, everybody had already died, so there was really nothing to go along with that. So, and the fact that you just mentioned, I mean, she met the Queen, the King. I mean, she was very involved in royalty in Great Britain. I mean, they loved her. And the reason they loved her is because of what she was able to do. I mean, at the end of the day, what did the British get from it? The British got from it that they could infiltrate the Continental Army, that they could get so close to George Washington. I mean, that's how close they could get to him. And they could do it through nefarious means, even striking up a conversation during a dance in a ballroom where conversations start. And it lasts, a couple of years, but you almost got, what you were looking for. So I don't think history does a good job in the talking about this aspect of it with Peggy. I think she gets lost, and I think shame on us in history for not bringing out all sides to this, because what a great movie this would make. Story between Arnold and Andre.
And speaking of movies and dramas and all that, whatever we may say was the original relationship between Benedict Arnold and Peggy Shippen, they stay married, and I think they have like 5 children. He dies in 1801, still traveling, still trying to make money. And until her death in 1804, and I think she was like 43, 44, 45 when she died, she stayed with her children, focused on raising her children. And, so at the end of the day, whatever the original relationship was between Peggy and Benedict, why they originally got married, whatever the case may be, it lasted. It lasted until both of them died.
It lasted, but she also had a hard life after Benedict died, because he had racked up so much debt that she had to sell just about everything, and just to basically try to make it. So I think once again you could see, I'm Benedict Arnold's wife and try to claim the benefits from that. I'm Andre's friend who was able to try to. I think even afterwards she had to keep playing a part. She had to keep playing the role. And it is sad. She was young, as you mentioned, I think 40s, and I think it was cancer or something that took her away. But it is interesting to me, just there's so many different levels that take place in the American Revolution. And we just talk about, I think you mentioned it earlier, the patriots and the loyalists and, the redcoats. But most of the action didn't take place on the battlefield. Most of the really cool stuff of the American Revolution took place off the battlefield. The wheeling and dealing, the planning, the manipulation, the strategy. It's just all of this it's just fascinating to study and to talk about.
International intrigue, politics, the Spanish, the French, the British. It's a fascinating history. Well, Chris, thanks for another great episode. Hope our listeners enjoyed this episode. We encourage you to share this episode or the podcasts in general with your family and friends. If you have an idea for a future episode, or you have a comment, you can find us on Twitter or Facebook, or you can email us at historyyousshouldknow@gmail.com. That's history, the letter you should know, @gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Ray.
I'm Chris.
We'll talk to you later.